I'll tell you what I told the debrief board when they asked how we found the place. Badly. The approach corridor to Kethmureth 7 runs through a debris field that used to be a shipping relay, and the relay didn't come apart cleanly. It came apart the way things tend to come apart at that edge of Velorveth space, sideways and fast, a cascade failure nobody predicted, hull plating flung in every direction at velocities that turned the whole corridor into a slow grinder. The charts showed it as a navigational caution zone, which is the kind of language that tells you the person who wrote the chart had good intentions and limited experience with what navigational caution looks like in practice. The reality was closer to a navigational impossibility. Velorveth Fleet Assessment had looked at that corridor 19 days before our arrival and rated it non-transitable for any vessel larger than a 2-man scout. They weren't wrong. They just didn't account for the fact that we weren't coming in a vessel. We came in on tethers. 4 of us, me, Corporal Yen Sae, Specialist Davkos, and Specialist Wura Osk. We exited the compact cutter threshold margin at 700 meters from the corridor's navigable edge and crossed the debris field hand over hand on magline while the cutter held station and waited. It took us 4 hours. The magline technique is not comfortable and it is not fast. What it is possible in conditions where every other approach isn't. You move through the field the way you move through any hostile terrain, by reading it, by staying patient, by not asking it to be something other than what it is. The debris doesn't care about your timeline. You work around it. Koss took a piece of plating across the left shoulder in the 2nd hour. It came off a slowly rotating section of hull frame, the kind of thing that shows up on LiDAR as a navigational hazard, and in practice hits you because you were watching the larger problem 30 meters ahead. The plating hit hard enough to compress the suit material against his shoulder joint and leave a crease in the hardened underlay that went most of the way through. He acknowledged the hit on the comm, said suit contained, and kept moving. I logged it for medical review, and we continued. Osk had to cut around a section of hull frame the size of a residential block that was rotating on an irregular axis. Irregular meaning the prediction model kept updating every 30 seconds as its center of gravity shifted with each partial rotation. He cut around it twice before he found the window. Yen and I flagged the path behind us with beacon anchors as we moved so we could pull the supply caches through afterward on guideline. By the time we reached the outer hull of Kethmureth 7, all 4 of us were running elevated heart rates and had said very little for the past 3 hours. That's standard for Deathworlder response work. There's a rhythm to it that you learn after enough operations, which is that the difficult part is usually getting to where the work starts. Once you're there, the work itself tends to clarify. Problems that looked complicated from a distance resolve into simpler shapes up close. This isn't optimism. It's just the nature of problems. They look larger when you can't yet see their actual edges. I cut the outer hull breach at the maintenance access point on the station's northwestern face, which the schematics listed as a low-traffic service entry, and which in practice meant a hatch that hadn't been opened from outside in a long time, with a seal that had started to oxidize at the lower right corner. I worked the seal for 8 minutes. Then it opened. Yen went in first because she's smaller and faster in tight spaces. Then Koss, then Osk, then me, pulling the supply cache line behind me and securing the hatch at my back. The interior smelled like recycled air that had been recycled one too many times. It had the particular staleness that builds up when a station's atmosphere management systems are running at reduced capacity, not dangerous yet, but carrying the specific weight of air that has been breathed and cleaned, and breathed again more times than its filtration cycle was designed to handle. The corridor lights were at half power. Everything was quiet except for a ventilation fan somewhere in the lower decks that was cycling with a slight irregularity, a faint, uneven rhythm, the mechanical equivalent of someone breathing a little too carefully. Yen keyed her suit comm, low tone, contact ahead 20 meters, 3 individuals. I came up beside her. They were positioned at the T-junction, where the maintenance corridor met the main internal transit way. 3 Velorvath extraction workers in station coveralls layered over emergency thermal wraps, all 3 holding sidearms aimed at us. Compact pattern Velorvath civilian models, the kind issued to station personnel for wildlife and pressure suit emergency protocols, not for holding a position against a raider siege. One of the 3 was bracing his forearm against the corridor wall to keep his aim steady. He wasn't shaking from fear exactly. He was shaking from exhaustion. There's a difference in the quality of it, and 19 days of crisis fatigue has a particular signature. I've seen it often enough to know. I raised both hands, palms outward, and said in Velorvath standard, "Compact joint forces, we received your distress beacon." The one in the middle didn't lower her weapon. She was taller than the other 2, copper-gray skin, with a slight silvering at the temples that suggested either age or the kind of stress that produces early gray, dark hair pulled back in a working knot, pale gold eyes that were doing something complicated. I'd call it calculation, the specific look of a person running a problem set they're not sure will resolve, trying to match the thing in front of them against the models they have available. She looked at the 4 of us. She looked at the breach point we'd come through, the hatch still faintly lit from the guideline beacon anchors visible through the hull seal. She looked back at us. "That approach corridor is rated non-transitable," she said. Her voice was controlled, the kind of controlled that has been practiced for 19 days. "We know," I said. Velorvath Fleet Assessment flagged it 19 days ago. Non-transitable for vessels above 2-man scout configuration. We read the assessment. Then she stopped. Something shifted in the calculation behind her eyes. Not relief yet. Relief is something that comes after the threat model updates. She was still in the middle of updating hers. "How many of you are there?" 4. A pause. She looked at Yin, who had moved past the initial contact geometry and was unwrapping one of the supply caches we'd pulled through behind us with the practiced efficiency of someone who's done this many times. She looked at Kas, who had taken off his helmet to get a better look at the shoulder damage. The crease in the hardened underlay was visible even in the half-power corridor lighting, a long dark compression line that told its own story about what the debris field had been like. She looked at Osk, who had his wrist display up and was pulling in the station schematics we'd queued from the threshold margins databanks. Then she lowered her weapon. The other 2 lowered theirs a half-second later, following her lead. "I'm Warden Commander Kethai's SAE Murren," she said. "Velorvath Extraction Station Keth Mureth 7. I have 63 personnel on this station currently sheltering on the upper 3 levels. We have been under siege for 19 days by a raider coalition holding all 3 primary approach corridors." "Sergeant First Class Oren Tail," I said. "Compact Joint Forces, Deathworlder Response Unit." "This is Corporal Yin SAE, Specialist Davkas, Specialist Wura Osk." "Deathworlder Response." She said it the way you say a phrase you've heard before but never expected to hear applied to your specific problem. "Yes, ma'am." She looked at me for a long 2 seconds. Then she turned and led us deeper into the station without waiting to see if we were following. We followed. I want to be clear about something before I describe what came next, because I've told this account to several people since the debrief, and I've noticed that people tend to hear certain parts differently than I intend them. Warden Commander Murren did not become a different person when we arrived. She did not suddenly relax her posture or hand over authority or treat us like rescuers who'd arrived to carry her people out of a situation she'd failed to manage. She walked us through Keth Mureth 7 the way you'd walk a visiting inspection team through a facility you'd kept running under very difficult conditions, with a certain precise proprietary quality, like she wanted us to have a clear picture of the state of things before anyone started making decisions, which was correct. That's exactly what the situation required. The command level was on the station's 3rd floor. Up from the maintenance corridors through an access stairway, that had its lighting running at 30%. The main display on the command level was a large tactical overview system, the kind designed for managing extraction operations across multiple zones, now repurposed as a siege monitoring interface. Murren had annotated it extensively. The raider positions were marked with observed heat signatures and the times those signatures had last moved. The approach corridors were color-coded: yellow for Corridor A, blue for Corridor B, red for Corridor C, with estimated personnel counts alongside each marker. The station's own resources were logged in a separate display window: power generation levels, atmosphere management capacity, sidearm charge levels, food and water consumption per day against reserves. 3 approach corridors, she said, pulling the tactical display to its largest scale. The display flickered slightly as it recalibrated power management, everything lean. The Raider Coalition has teams holding all 3. Their strategy is not to breach us. They're waiting for our systems to fail. The air scrubbers are the primary timeline, and below that the generation capacity for the inner door seals. They have a long time horizon. We don't. How long until the scrubbers become critical? I asked. At current load and personnel count, 18 to 22 hours before air quality in the lower level begins to affect cognitive function. 60 hours before the lower levels become non-habitable. Upper levels have an additional cycle after that, but the generation draw from the inner door seals will drop us below functional station capacity before we reach that point. We would have to start evacuating lower-level personnel to the upper levels within the next 12 hours to extend the timeline. Can you do that without opening the corridors? Internal access is intact. We can move personnel between levels, but the upper levels weren't designed to house this many people for an extended period. At full occupancy, the atmosphere management overhead goes up, and we lose time rather than gaining it. I looked at the tactical display: 3 corridors, 3 teams. She'd been watching them through the thermal sensors and the listening points her crew had set up throughout the siege, small audio pickups taped to corridor walls at intervals, running through the station's maintenance network and feeding data to the command-level display. It was a clean tactical picture, better than I'd expected. Better, honestly, than some formal military positions I've seen after 19 days of sustained pressure. You've maintained situational awareness on their positions this entire time, I said. We couldn't go to them, she said, but we could watch. She pulled up the detailed sensor feed from Corridor B. This is their command position. Highest heat signature concentration, most consistent personnel clustering. The other 2 corridors have lighter coverage. My best count puts Corridor A at 7 to 9, Corridor C at 8 to 10, Corridor B at 11 to 14. What's the wall composition on Corridor B? She looked at me with an expression that suggested the question had surprised her. Industrial extraction-grade composite, standard for the load-bearing approach corridors on the station type. That's what I thought. I looked at Osk, who nodded once. He'd had the same thought at the same time, which is one of the reasons he's good at his job. Industrial extraction-grade composite is a specific mineral matrix engineered for high-vibration environments, the kind you find around extraction equipment running continuous mechanical cycles. It has a property that's incidental to its primary purpose, but operationally useful. It conducts resonance frequencies through its full run before the energy dissipates. The attenuation rate is low, which means a charge placed at one end propagates effectively for most of the corridor's length, enough to be extremely unpleasant to anyone standing in that corridor without vibration-dampening underlays. We had resonance charges in the supply cache. All 4 of us were wearing compact Deathworlder response suits with vibration-dampening underlay rated for seismic survey work on high-gravity worlds, because that's the environment we were designed to operate in. We're going to need approximately 40 minutes, I said. She looked at me. Something was happening behind those gold eyes. the tactical mind engaging with what I was implying, running the geometry. To clear all 3 corridors simultaneously. Sequentially, corridor A first, then C, then I take B. That's 3 separate engagements with 4 personnel, against an estimated total of 26 to 33 individuals with, I should tell you, compact pattern combat armament. They came equipped for this. I know, we read the beacon data. The assessment. I know what the assessments say, I said. Tell me what you need from your end. She looked at me for a long moment. The calculation was running, but underneath it something was beginning to shift. I could see her mapping the thing in front of her. 4 people who had come through a non-transitable debris field on tethers, one of them having taken a plate strike that would have opened a standard suit. All 4 of them standing here asking her what she needed, against whatever her prior models had told her about what was possible. Something resolved in her expression. Keep my people off the main transit way, she said. I'll hold everyone on the upper 2 levels. I have 2 crew members with medical training. I'll keep them staged at the stairwell entrance on level 2. And, a slight pause, tell me when it's done. You'll know, I said. That's when I understood she was going to be fine. What followed over the next 3 hours was, from inside it, mostly methodical. I want to describe it accurately because I'm aware that from outside, from the command level where Murren was watching the thermal display, and the listening point feeds while her crew waited in controlled silence on the upper levels, it may have looked like something more dramatic than it felt. Yen took corridor A. She went alone because we were 4 people and 3 corridors, and Yen is the fastest and the quietest in confined geometry. That second quality matters more than most people expect. She grew up in a settlement on Kelev Prime, which runs at 1.7 standard gravity with atmospheric requirements above 200 meters elevation, and a fauna profile that means you learn early to move without making noise that carries, or you don't get the opportunity to learn much else. The apex predators on Kelev Prime hunt partly by detecting the vibration of movement through the substrate, which means that from childhood you develop a gait pattern that minimizes heel impact and weight transfer. You move from the ball of the foot with your weight distributed always. Most people who grow up somewhere easier than Kelev Prime learn that gait only by deliberate training, and it never becomes as clean as the one you learned before you were old enough to understand why you were learning it. Yen learned it before she was 5 years old. She's been doing Deathworlder response work for 7 years on top of that. She was 31 at the time of this operation. I mention her age because people sometimes look at the unit and expect a certain kind of person, a certain weight of years, and she doesn't match that expectation, and her not matching it is part of why she's good. The raiders in Corridor A had 9 individuals in compact pattern armament, which means they were reasonably well equipped and had been doing this long enough to establish overlapping fields of observation. What they didn't have was any detection mechanism calibrated for someone moving at Yen's noise floor. She cleared Corridor A in 23 minutes. 9 individuals, compact pattern armament, spread across a 160-meter run of corridor with 2 branching alcoves. I'm not going to detail the mechanics of it because the mechanics are not the point. The point is 23 minutes against 9 armed individuals in a prepared position. The listening point feed from Corridor A went quiet at that mark, and the thermal signatures stopped moving, and Yen's comm signal came through clean. A confirmed clear. Kas and Osk took Corridor C together. I put them as a pair because Kas's shoulder was compromised. The plating strike hadn't broken anything, but it had reduced his range on the left side, and I didn't want him working a branching corridor alone with reduced range on his off side. Together, they're a clean unit. Kas is from a mining settlement on Darath, which orbits a red dwarf in an 11-hour day cycle, and has a surface that produces people with the particular patience and physical density you develop in high radiation, resource-scarce environments. He grew up working extraction shifts, which is part of why he's good at reading extraction station layouts intuitively. He knows how the systems interconnect because he grew up in systems like it. He'd taken the plating strike in the debris field without breaking stride and filed it on the comm with 2 words and kept moving, which is also characteristic. Koss doesn't amplify problems. He documents them and continues. It's one of the more useful qualities a person can have in this work. Osk is from Thessaly, which is technically habitable and practically the kind of place that makes its inhabitants structurally different from most people who have never been there. The medical literature on Thessaly's population uses language like enhanced cardiovascular output and elevated baseline endurance capacity, which is accurate in the way that all accurate language is sometimes inadequate. What it means in practice is that Osk can operate for extended periods at levels that other people can't sustain, and he does so without appearing to find it remarkable, because, from his perspective, it isn't. He's been doing Deathworlder response work for 5 years. He has the particular quality, common to people from high-demand worlds, of treating difficult things as the normal baseline rather than as exceptional conditions. When the suit patch light went on in Corridor C, he noted it on the comm, said it was contained, and kept working. That's also characteristic. Together in a corridor, they have a quality of mutual situational awareness that makes them more efficient than either is alone, not because they communicate constantly, but because they don't need to. 7 years of working in the same unit builds a shared operational language that doesn't require words. They cleared Corridor C in 31 minutes. 10 individuals, compact pattern armament, spread across a 200-meter run with 3 branching positions. The listening point feed went quiet and Koss's voice came through. C confirmed clear. Osk took a hit, non-critical, suit contained it. I logged it for medical review. On the command level, Murrin would have seen the thermal signatures in Corridor C stop moving and heard the comm traffic come through. That left Corridor B for me, because Corridor B was the command position and I run these operations, and the command position is mine. The resonance charges needed placement at 3 points along Corridor B's left wall to achieve full propagation. Getting to those placement points, without going through the corridor itself, meant using the maintenance crawlways that ran parallel to the left wall between the structural members. The crawlways on this type of extraction station are designed for maintenance drone access, which means they run at approximately 70% of a standard human cross-section. I am not a small man. 21 years of Deathworlder response work builds a particular kind of body, and I have the body it builds, broad across the shoulders, dense, not designed for tight spaces but not deterred by them either. Moving through a 70% crawlway in full response kit is a specific kind of unpleasant that I have learned to treat as information rather than obstacle. The information it was giving me was that I needed to move in a particular sequence. Left arm extended, right arm trailing, rotation at the hips to clear the shoulder frame, and that moving in that sequence I could maintain approximately 40% of my normal speed. I placed the first charge at 11 minutes, second charge at 17, third charge at 22. At 25 minutes I was out of the crawlway and in position at the corridor's internal exit, sealed behind the corner with the detonation controller in my hand. The resonance charges fire in a programmed cascade. First charge, a 2-second wave. Second charge at 3 seconds, the amplitude building on the first. Third charge at 5 seconds, the full resonance pattern propagating through the composite wall material at the extraction grade's conduction rate. I've been inside that propagation pattern with the dampening underlay active. You feel a low hum in the sternum, no more than that. From outside the suit, standing on the composite floor that's conducting the full resonance sequence without attenuation, I've been told it is extremely convincing. The kind of convincing that overrides tactical discipline. The kind that makes people move. The 11 individuals in Corridor B moved. Not all in the same direction, which is what you want. Disorganized movement under duress is easier to work with than organized movement under duress. I won't go through the mechanics of what happened at the corridor exit over the following 4 minutes, because the mechanics are not the point. The point is that at the end of 4 minutes there were 11 individuals no longer in a position to hold Corridor B, and I was walking back through it toward the command level with nothing broken on my end. I keyed the comm. B is clear. A confirmed clear, Yen already done. C confirmed clear, Cos. Copy, I said, pulling back to command level. The station was quiet in a different way now. The ventilation fan was still cycling with its uneven rhythm on the lower level. The half-power corridor lighting was still the same half-power it had been when we arrived. Nothing physical about the station had changed. But the quality of the quiet was different. It had become the quiet of a situation that has resolved, rather than the quiet of one that is about to get worse. I walked back through Corridor B and took the stairway up to level 3. When I came onto the command level, Murren was standing at the main display. She didn't turn when I came in. She was looking at the thermal feed, which showed 3 corridors now all showing the same flat, cleared pattern. She'd watched the whole operation in real time through her sensor network, every thermal signature dropping in sequence, a then C then B, each corridor going from occupied to clear while her 63 crew members waited on the upper levels. She stood at the display for a long moment after I came in. Then she said without turning, "Your corporal, Corridor A 23 minutes." "Yes." "Against 9 individuals." "She's good at her work." "Your specialists, Corridor C 31 minutes." "They work well together." Now she turned. Her face had done something since I'd last looked at it directly. The controlled expression that had been managing 19 days of siege pressure had shifted, not collapsed, nothing dramatic, but the effort behind it had changed character. The gold eyes were looking at me differently. "You came through the debris field on tethers," she said. "Yes." Velorveth Fleet Assessment rated that corridor non-transitable before the siege began. When we fired the distress beacon, I calculated the transit numbers myself. I knew what the corridor looked like. I put the beacon on repeat because Velorveth protocol requires beacon maintenance during active distress events, but I want to be accurate about this. I had concluded that rescue via the primary approach corridor was not realistic. I told my crew we would find a way out because that's what a commander says. I didn't tell them I thought the way out would have to come from inside. "What did you have in mind?" I asked. I had a partial plan involving a maintenance drone modified for exterior hull work and a 2-person vacuum operation to reach the debris field edge and place a secondary relay beacon closer to the transit lane. She paused. The drone's drive capacity was insufficient. I ran the numbers 3 times. "That's not a bad plan," I said, "given what you had to work with." "It wasn't good enough," she looked at me directly. "Yours was." It helped that we'd done this type of corridor before. Not this specific corridor, but the approach geometry. Moving through hostile debris in full kit, staged entry, 4-person corridor clearance against larger numbers. The parameters were familiar. "Familiar," she said, a slight pause. 3 approach corridors simultaneously, 4 people against 30-odd armed individuals. Familiar. In the general shape of the problem, yes. She looked at me for a moment the way you look at something when your existing categories for it are insufficient. Behind her, through the command level's main viewport, the docking indicator light had begun to pulse. The threshold margin had received our all clear and was moving up from holding position, running nav lights in the corridor approach configuration, threading the debris field at reduced speed along the beacon anchor guideline we'd laid on the way in. 63 people were going to walk out of here. "I need to begin evacuation prep," Murren said. "Yes, ma'am." She moved. I watched her work. She pulled up the internal comm system and began assigning deck responsibilities to her crew leaders with the kind of economical precision you develop when your people have learned to trust the voice completely. Assignments went out and were acknowledged immediately. No hesitation, no need for clarification or repetition. Whatever those 19 days had cost them, she had kept the unit coherent, and they were responding like a unit. Kas, Yin, and Osk came onto the command level in succession. Kas had his helmet off and was holding his left shoulder at a careful angle. Osk had a field patch on his right forearm. Yin looked at the viewport, saw the threshold margins nav lights threading the debris field, and went to help stage the station personnel who were starting to move toward the docking corridor. Murren finished her prep assignments and came back to where I was standing. The first of her crew were already moving in the stairwell below us, the sound of it traveling up through the deck, the controlled movement of people who are doing something purposeful after 19 days of waiting. "There's a formal process," she said, and I could hear that she was choosing her words carefully, not performing them. "Velorveth has a commendation protocol for compact personnel rendering emergency assistance under hazardous conditions. I'll file the documentation when we dock." "You don't have to." "I know." She looked at me directly. "I want to say something before the formal process starts, before everything becomes documentation and protocol filings and reviewing boards. Before it becomes the official version." She looked at the viewport for a moment, at the approaching ship, then back at me. "I told my crew every day that we were going to find a way out. I said it because that's what a commander does when there's no better option available. I believed it enough to say it with some conviction. But I'd done the transit numbers myself, and I knew what I was saying wasn't entirely accurate, and I said it anyway because the alternative was telling 63 people that I didn't know if the numbers were going to work." A pause. "They held a broken door seal for 8 days. 6-hour shifts, physically holding the mechanism in the closed position because the actuator had failed and we didn't have replacement parts. They rationed their meals so the younger crew could eat more. They kept their shifts without a single incident." She was quiet for a moment. "I want to say it to a person who was here before it goes into a document. Those people were extraordinary, and you made it possible for me to bring them home." I thought about that for a moment. "You held this station for 19 days, I said. "We cleared 3 corridors. Those are different scales of work." "That's generous." "It's accurate," I said. "We had training and equipment and a specific tactical problem. You had 63 people and 7 sidearms and a door you were holding shut by hand, and you kept them alive for 19 days and you kept them functional. That's the thing the formal process won't capture." She looked at me for a long time. Through the viewport, the threshold margin was settling into its docking approach, thrusters trimming precisely in the constrained space of the station's docking face. "What you said earlier," she said, "about not reading non-transitable as a verdict, about reading it as a description." "Yes. I've been a warden commander for 6 years. Before that I ran extraction operations on 3 other stations, difficult postings, frontier margin, the kind where you spend most of your time managing what the assessments call acceptable risk. And I've read a lot of assessments." She paused. "I've always read them as verdicts. The assessment says non-transitable, the corridor is non-transitable. The assessment says the approach is too hostile for a 4-person team, the approach is too hostile." Another pause. "I'm going to read them differently now." "You'll still have to file them correctly," I said. A small sound, almost a laugh. "Not quite. Yes, I'll still file them correctly." We cleared the station in 2 hours and 11 minutes from the time the threshold margin docked. Murren went last, the way commanders go last. She walked every level of Kethmureth 7 before she left. A final check. The discipline of a person who has been responsible for something and takes that responsibility all the way to its conclusion. I waited at the docking collar. When she came through, she paused beside me. "The ventilation fan," she said. "Level 3 port side. It's been cycling unevenly for 12 days. I never had the capacity to get to it." "I flagged it for the Velorvath repair schedule," I said. She looked at me. Something settled in her expression, not surprise exactly, more like a thing being confirmed. "Of course you did," she said. She walked through the collar onto the threshold margin. I followed. The collar sealed behind us and the docking mechanism disengaged, and we began the slow transit back through the beacon-marked path toward clear space. In the threshold margin's main cabin, Murren's 63 crew members occupied every available space: jump seats, cleared deck space, the narrow bench along the starboard wall. The noise level was low in a specific way, not the suppressed quiet of people who are afraid to speak, but the organic quiet of people who have been talking constantly for 19 days and have arrived at a point where silence is a form of rest. They had the look of a unit that had come through something together and didn't need to discuss it yet. Discussion is for later. Right now was for sitting on deck plates and eating whatever Yin had in the supply cache and not thinking about door seals. Some of them were sleeping, heads tipped back against the bulkhead, or resting on a neighbor's shoulder with the unceremonious ease of people who have been sleeping in shifts in difficult conditions long enough that they can sleep anywhere. Some were eating with the particular focus of the genuinely hungry, the kind of hungry that doesn't taste the food, just needs it. An older man near the starboard forward position was sitting with his hands open in his lap, eyes on the middle distance, the look of someone who has decided that the thinking can wait for somewhere that isn't a packed transit ship between a siege and a waypoint. A young woman in the port midsection was checking her tablet with the focused concentration of someone who is ensuring the record of the work is accurate, which I recognized as a specific form of processing. You do the documentation first because it gives you something to do with your hands while the larger thing settles. Yin was cross-legged on the deck near the forward bulkhead, talking quietly with one of Murren's younger crew members about what appeared to be a question about the resonance charge placement parameters. Yin explaining something has a particular quality. She works from first principles, and she doesn't skip steps, and she gives you time to catch up. The young crew member had the look of someone who was catching up. Osk was asleep in the aft section, arm flat on the bench beside him. Kas was awake, managing his shoulder with the disciplined economy of someone who has learned the body cooperates better when you stop arguing with it. Murren sat down beside me at the aft observation port. Neither of us said anything for a while. There wasn't anything that needed saying. The threshold margin moved through the dark at transit cruise, the debris field already behind us, already receding. The observation port showed stars and the faint scattered glitter of the relay wreckage at the edge of the field. I watched it diminish with the particular quality of attention I always give to difficult terrain after a clean exit, not nostalgia, just the habit of noting what it looked like so you have accurate information if you ever need to go through it again. After a time, she said, "Where does your unit go next?" "Wherever the beacon comes from," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "Do you always get there in time?" I thought about that honestly. "No," I said, "not always. The corridor is sometimes what the assessment says it is. The timeline runs out. You get there and you do what you can with what's left, and what's left is sometimes very little." I looked at the observation port. This one worked out. "Because of the tethers," she said. "Because of the tethers and because your station held. Both things had to be true." She considered that. "That's a different way of thinking about it than I've been using." "What way have you been using?" "The way where we were waiting to be rescued," she said, "where the agency was entirely on your end." "Your sensor network," I said. "Your crew rotation on the door seal. Your people rationed and functional and in position when we arrived. If any of those things had failed, if your crew had come apart, if the door seal had gone while we were still in the debris field, we'd have been clearing corridors with no one left to go home." She was quiet for a moment. "That's generous." It's accurate, I said. The rescue only works when the people being rescued hold their part of it. She considered that for a long time. The observation port showed the debris field dwindling, the beacon anchors we'd placed already too small to see. She said, "That's a difficult way to live. It has its compensations." She looked at the observation port. "I've spent 17 years in Velorvath extraction operations. Before this posting and the 3 before it, I worked survey support on the outer margin mapping runs, resource assessment, the work that makes the extraction stations possible before the stations exist. Long postings, difficult conditions." She paused. "In 17 years, I've filed a great many reports. I've documented every significant event on every posting I've held. And I've been very accurate. I believe in accurate documentation. It's how you improve the work. It's how you make the next posting better than the last one." Another pause. "I've never written a report that came close to describing the people who actually made the work possible. The crew member who held the door seal for 8-day stretches without complaint. The specialist who rationed his own meals and didn't put it in any log. The woman who spent 6 of the 19 days personally routing our atmosphere management load calculations by hand when the automated system started giving inconsistent outputs." She was quiet for a moment. "I don't have language for that. The reports don't have categories for it." And tonight, I watched 4 people come through a non-transitable debris field on tethers and clear 3 corridors against 30 individuals in 40 minutes. And I don't have language for that either. "The debrief board will have a form," I said. "The debrief board will have a form," she agreed. There was something dry and measured in her voice. 4 pages. Standard compact emergency response commendation. Multiple sections with prescribed word limits. She looked at me sideways. "It will not capture what I watched tonight." "No," I said, "it won't." "Does that bother you? The gap between the form and the thing?" I thought about that. "The form isn't the thing," I said. "The form is the record that the thing happened. The thing is here." I meant the cabin around us, the 63 people breathing and sleeping and eating rations, the ship moving through the dark. You don't need the form to tell you what the thing was. You were there. She was quiet for a long moment, looking at the observation port, looking at the diminishing glitter of the relay wreckage. "I fired the beacon on day 1, she said. "And I maintained it because protocol requires beacon maintenance during active distress events, and I believe in following protocols because protocols exist for reasons, and you undermine them at your peril." She paused. "On day 7, I had a private conversation with myself about what I actually believed, not what I was saying to my crew, not what I was putting in the internal logs. What I actually believed when I was honest with myself in the dark at 300 when the next shift change was 2 hours out, and the generation load numbers were moving in the wrong direction." Another pause. "I believed we were probably going to lose. I believed the corridor numbers didn't work and the timeline was going to beat us, and the best outcome was that my crew would hold together long enough that the official record would show we'd conducted ourselves correctly." She turned and looked at me directly. "And then the numbers worked." "The numbers don't always win," I said. "No," she looked at me steadily, those pale gold eyes with the observation port's dim light in them. "I'm going to carry this, what you did and what it means that it was possible. I'm going to carry it the way you carry something that changes the size of what you think is available." A pause. "I told my crew every day that we were going to find a way out. Next time I say it, I'm going to mean it more completely." I didn't have a response for that. I didn't need one. The threshold margin crossed into clear space, and the debris field was behind us, and ahead of us the transit waypoint marker was already visible on the nav display, a steady green pulse in the dark. We docked at the compact transit waypoint 4 hours later. A Velorvath relief vessel was holding position there, larger than the threshold margin, better equipped for personnel transport, ready to take Murren's crew home. The transfer took 1 hour and 20 minutes. Her people moved in good order, the way units move when they're used to Murren's direction. When the last of them had crossed over, she stood at the transfer collar for a moment. She looked across the lock at me. "The formal commendation will take 3 weeks," she said. "They usually do. I'll submit it personally. The standard form doesn't have space for what I want to say, so I'll attach a supplementary statement as a separate document." A pause. "The reviewing board will probably file it as administrative overflow." "They usually do." The smallest version of a smile. "Keth-Mureth 7 is on the Velorvath repair schedule," she said. 6 weeks until it's operational again. When it comes back online, I'll be the warden commander." "Of course you will," I said. "There's a ventilation fan on level 3 port side. That's going to need attention." "There is." She held my eyes for a moment, not performing anything, just present. "I want to say it clearly," she said, "before the vessel seals and the protocol begins. What you did tonight coming through that corridor, the 4 of you on tethers, for people you'd never met because a beacon fired into a non-transitable approach, I don't have the category for it. I've been trying to find the category since the moment you came through that hull breach and I have not found it." A pause. "What I have found is that it exists, that it is possible, that there are people who read non-transitable as a description and not a verdict, and who come anyway." She held my eyes one more time. "I'll spend the rest of my career believing they might come." She stepped back from the collar, the transfer lock sealed. I stood at the viewport as the Velorvath relief vessel began its transit drive wake brightening against the dark. 63 people aboard, Keth-Mureth 7's crew going home. I watched it until the drive wake faded, and it was just another light among lights, and then just the dark. Yen came and stood beside me. "Osk's arm is fine," she said, "field patch held." "Good. Kas needs a medical scan when we dock." "I'll log it." A pause. She looked at where the relief vessel had been. "She held that station together," Yen said. "It wasn't a question." 19 days, I said. 7 sidearms and a broken seal." "That's good work." "Yes, it is." Yen went back to her seat and her debrief form. Kas was already working on his. Osk was compiling the corridor clearance log from his wrist display. The threshold margin ran quietly through the dark on the transit back to our forward base. I stayed at the viewport for a while after the drive wake faded. The transit waypoint was quiet. Kas was already in the medical bay getting his shoulder scanned. Osk had his debrief form open and was working through it with the thorough, unhurried competence he applies to all documentation. Yen had finished her form and was reviewing the beacon approach data from the transit in, looking for anything in the debris field's rotation patterns that would be useful for future corridor assessments. That's also standard after an operation like this. You do the work, and then you do the documentation, and then you think about how to do the work better the next time the corridor looks like this one. The formal commendation came through 4 weeks later. 4 pages, 3 standard sections, 1 supplementary statement. The supplementary statement was filed as administrative overflow by the reviewing board, exactly as she'd predicted. I read it at the aft observation port of the threshold margin, between beacon responses, in the quiet between one operation and the next. She had not tried to make it fit any of the standard language. She had written it as an accurate record of what had happened and what it had meant, and she had not apologized for the length. She described the debris corridor, the tethers, the 4-hour transit, the 3 corridors cleared in sequence. She described the listening point network her crew had maintained for 19 days and the 6-hour shifts on the door seal and the rationing. She wrote about all of it with the same precise attention she'd given to the tactical display on the command level. Nothing inflated, nothing minimized, just the thing as accurately as she could put it. The final line said, "They did not look at the corridor and calculate whether it could be crossed. They looked at what was on the other side of it. For 17 years I have written accurate reports. This is the most accurate report I have ever filed. I put it in the mission record with the rest of the documentation from Keth-Merath 7, logged the ventilation fan repair on the Velorvath maintenance tracking system, so it would appear in the repair crew's pre-inspection checklist, and put the threshold margin back on the beacon rotation. Wherever the next one comes from, we'll go.